Imagine you take a photo of a friend, right? And they're sitting in this, like, dark, dimly lit, really moody cafe.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, and now you want an AI video generator to take that person and animate them walking through a bright, sunny, completely flat 2D cartoon world.
Right.
Sounds simple enough on paper, but the AI well, it completely panics. It literally cuts and pastes their photorealistic shadow-covered face straight onto this flat cartoon background.
Oh, yeah. It looks terrible.
It's so bad, it drags the heavy, realistic lighting from the cafe right into the cartoon universe. So today, we are looking at why AI has been, frankly, utterly incapable of separating who you are from where you are, and how a brand new architecture might have just solved this whole thing.
It really is. It's kind of the ultimate bottleneck in generative AI right now, because we have these massive, incredibly capable base video models, but the second you try to force them to remember a specific subject, like if you want to personalize the generation, they just become hopelessly anchored to the visual reality of that reference photo.
Right.
They suffer from what we call domain entanglement.
Domain entanglement. And that is exactly the mission for this deep dive. We are unpacking a pretty groundbreaking new paper from researchers at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology.
Yeah.
It's called DomainShuttle, Free-Form, Open Domain, Subject-Driven Text-to-Video Generation. And for you listening, consider this a peer-to-peer exploration, whether you're a grad student, an engineer, or just someone tracking the bleeding edge of generative architecture. We're getting into the mathematical weeds today.
We definitely are.
We're looking at the paper itself, the architecture diagrams, specifically these mechanisms called domain motif and video reference dual rope.
Yeah.
And the ablation studies that really prove why this approach is just a massive generational leap.
Yeah, and to really grasp why DomainShuttle is so disruptive, I think we have to establish the current landscape of subject-driven text-to-video generation, S2V, because the demands of users have just drastically outpaced what the architecture can actually handle.
Right, like in the early days, which, in AI time was maybe 18 months ago.
Practically ancient history.
Exactly. S2V was mostly this novelty focused on a single human identity. You'd take 20 selfies, use Dream Booth or something to fine-tune a model for a couple of hours, and it would learn your specific face.
Right, but that just doesn't scale.
No, not at all.
It doesn't scale, and it completely ignores the complexity of the real world. I mean, the real world isn't just a single subject portrait. We want multiple subjects interacting.
Right. You want a specific person interacting with a specific branded coffee cup, or like their specific dog.
Exactly. So the field naturally moved towards zero-shot multi-subject generation. We saw models like Phantom and VCE come out, and they designed these novel reference injection schemes.
Okay, reference injection schemes.
Yeah, basically they built pathways to force the base video model to look at multiple reference images and actually remember distinct entities simultaneously without needing hours of fine-tuning.
I remember some models even started pulling in, like, image-to-video architectures to give the AI a strong visual anchor, right? Or they plugged in multimodal large language models to help parse spatial instructions, like put the dog on the left and the cup on the right.
Yeah, and those were honestly really impressive engineering feats, but they all share this one critical structural flaw. They are almost entirely optimized for what the paper categorizes as in-domain generation.
Okay, let's draw a hard line right there, because understanding the difference between in-domain and cross-domain is basically the entire foundation of this deep dive.
It really is. So in-domain generation requires the AI to retain the reference subject's features as comprehensively as possible without altering their attributes or style.
So it's basically a one-to-one visual copy.
Right. Think of a photo of your golden retriever sitting on your living room rug. If you ask an in-domain model to generate a video of that dog walking across the room, it does a fantastic job. It keeps the photorealism, the specific indoor lighting, the texture of the fur, all of it is anchored to the reality of that original photo.
It's essentially just animating a photograph while keeping the physics and the visual universe of that photo entirely intact.
Exactly. But cross-domain generation is vastly more complex. It requires the AI to extract and preserve only the intrinsic features of the subject and discard the rest.
Intrinsic meaning like the core geometry.
Yeah, the underlying structural identity. So for a human, intrinsic features are the specific bone structure of the face, the spacing of the eyes, maybe the structural design of a specific piece of clothing. But crucially, cross-domain requires the model to let subject-irrelevant properties vary flexibly based on the text prompt.
So the irrelevant properties are the lighting, the shadows, the background, and most importantly, the art style, right? Like whether the target video is supposed to be a 3D animation or a pencil sketch.
Spot on, and this is where existing state-of-the-art models just fail spectacularly. The researchers identify this as entanglement.
Entanglement.
Right. Existing methods inject the visual features of the reference image into the video generation process so heavily that they literally cannot separate the subject's identity from the lighting or the style of the photo.
Which brings us right back to the cafe example from the intro. If I give a current model a photo of a woman in a dimly lit cafe and prompt it to generate her in a bright 2D anime style, the model tries to force those photorealistic, shadow-heavy pixels directly into the flat anime world.
Yeah, and the model creates what the paper calls copy-paste artifacts. It looks exactly like a magazine cutout glued onto a cartoon background. The identity is hopelessly entangled with the domain of the reference photo.
I'm trying to visualize this behavioral flaw. It reminds me of watching an amateur actor who only knows how to play themselves.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, if you cast them in a modern play wearing their own clothes, they do fine. That's in domain. But if you put them in a 19th century period piece, they just walk on stage wearing their modern clothes and speaking modern slang. They can't adapt.
I like that.
An ideal cross-domain model needs to be more like a method actor. Someone who retains their underlying skeletal structure. They are still fundamentally themselves, but they completely adopt the wardrobe, the accent, the lighting, and the rules of the new universe they're put in.
That definitely touches on the right concept, but let's actually push that actor analogy deeper into the mechanics.
Okay, let's do it.
Because it isn't just about the actor refusing to change clothes. The problem is that the director, which in this case is the AI's attention mechanism, is fundamentally confused about what constitutes the actor's identity.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the director mathematically believes the modern clothes and the modern slang are biologically attached to the actor's body. The model doesn't just refuse to adapt, it believes that the shadows on the face in the reference photo actually are the face.
Hold on, I'm stuck on something here. DomainShuttle uses 1.2.2 as its base video model, right? And 1.2.2 is this massive 14 billion parameter foundation model. It has seen millions of watercolor paintings and 3D animations during its pre-training. It already knows perfectly well what the word watercolor means.
It does.
So why go through all this architectural gymnastics when you can just write, make it a watercolor painting in the text prompt? Shouldn't the base model just handle the style shift naturally?
It's a very logical question, but it kind of ignores how reference injection mechanisms actually function at the tensor level.
Yeah.
You're right that the base model understands the text token for watercolor, but the mechanism used by current S2V models to inject the reference image is incredibly heavy-handed.
Meaning what exactly?
They force the visual features of the reference photo into the attention layers so aggressively that the visual signal completely drowns out the text prompt.
Oh, so it's basically an issue of signal-to-noise ratio within the attention layers.
Exactly. Think of it as sensory overpowering. The text prompt is whispering, make it watercolor, but the visual reference features are just screaming photorealistic shadows directly into the cross-attention blocks.
And the model just caves to the loudest voice.
Yeah, because the model is trained to minimize loss by preserving the subject, so it biases heavily toward the hum frequency pixel data of the reference. It just ignores the text prompt's domain instructions entirely.
Wow.
So to fix this entanglement, DomainShuttle had to completely rip apart the way the model processes video latents and reference images, which brings us to their first major architectural innovation, domain multi.
Domain multi, the domain mixture of transformers. Okay, before we get into how they broke the architecture apart, we need to quickly ground ourselves in the foundation they're building on. We aren't dealing with older UNet diffusion models here, are we?
No, DomainShuttle is built on a diffusion transformer architecture, or DIT. This is pretty much the modern standard now. Unlike UNets, which use convolutional layers to process images hierarchically, DITs use transformer blocks to process patches of visual data.
Almost exactly how large language models process tokens of text.
Yes. everything becomes a mathematical token. So during training, you have a text encoder, usually T5, that encodes your text prompt into a feature vector. And then you have a 3D variational autoencoder, or VAE.
Right, the VAE is super crucial here.
Extremely crucial. It takes your target video and your reference images and compresses them down from these raw, massive pixel grids into a dense, highly compressed latent space. So the video becomes a set of video latents, and the reference images become reference features.
Okay, so we are no longer looking at an image. We're looking at this highly abstract, multidimensional coordinate space where concepts and colors and shapes are all just represented as vectors.
Exactly, and the entire system is optimized using flow matching loss. Now, without reading the raw equation from the paper, the concept of flow matching is really about learning a continuous vector field. The model's job is to learn how to draw a path from pure, chaotic, random noise to the structured, clear video latent over a continuous timeline.
While being conditioned on the text and the reference images,
Right.
it's basically calculating the fluid dynamics of turning static into a recognizable scene.
I like that phrasing. But here is where the DomainShuttle researchers looked at the standard DIT block and identified the exact site of the entanglement infection. In a standard model, the video latents and the reference features are concatenated, just mixed together, far too early and far too indiscriminately before they pass through the self-attention mechanism.
So the model is trying to calculate the flow of the video and the flow of the reference image in the exact same breath.
Yeah, they're stepping on each other's toes.
What does DomainMate do differently then?
DomainRoot splits the patchified embeddings into two completely independent processing paths within the transformer block. They literally build a physical fork in the road inside the attention mechanism.
Let's talk about that self-attention calculation. Because in a standard transformer, you project your inputs into queries, keys, and values. Q, K, and V. How does DomainMo handle that?
So DomainMo creates independent linear projections for the video and the reference. You have a dedicated set of queries and keys for the video and a completely dedicated set of queries and keys for the reference image.
But they still need to talk to each other, right? I mean, if they're completely independent, the video won't know what the reference even looks like.
They do interact, but in a highly controlled manner. During the attention calculation, they bring the queries and keys together to calculate the attention scores. This lets the model figure out how the reference features mathematically relate to the video features.
Okay, that makes sense.
But, and this is the vital nuance, the learned weights, the actual neural network parameters that generate those queries and keys, are kept strictly independent and isolated during training.
Ah, okay. So the video branch is allowed to operate using its inherent pre-trained base model capabilities, while the reference branch specializes entirely on extracting precise subject features without corrupting the video branch's weights.
Exactly. But there is another crucial detail in this section. After the self-attention layer, the features pass through the textual cross-attention layer.
Right. This is where the text prompt, the instruction to make it a watercolor, interacts with the visual features.
Yes. And what the researchers did here is profound. They strictly froze the textual cross-attention layers during the entire training process.
Frozen, meaning the backpropagation algorithm is completely blocked from updating those specific neural weights while the model is learning how to inject the subject.
Correct.
But why would you freeze the part of the brain that reads the text?
Because of a phenomenon called catastrophic forgetting.
Ah, of course.
Yeah. If you allow the model to update the textual cross-attention weights while you are aggressively teaching it to hyperfocus on visual reference images, the model will slowly start to ignore the text. The visual learning will literally overwrite the text understanding. So by freezing those specific layers, they ensure that the base model's deep, intrinsic understanding of complex open domain text prompts is perfectly preserved. It still knows how to paint a watercolor because that knowledge is locked in a vault that the new training just can't touch.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. You protect the model's vocabulary while teaching it a new visual trick. But wait, we still haven't solved the core problem, have we? We have independent paths, yes. But how does the model actually know to leave the photorealistic lighting behind when moving the subject to the watercolor domain?
And that is the job of the next mechanism within this block, domain-aware
ADLN, adaptive layer normalization. Okay, let's break down the mechanics of this because it sounds like super dense textbook jargon. But reading the paper, it's actually the steering wheel for the whole style shift.
It really is.
So what is layer normalization and what makes it adaptive?
Layer normalization is a foundational technique in deep learning used to stabilize the training of neural networks. It normalizes the inputs across the features so the network doesn't get thrown off by massive spikes in numerical values.
Right, it keeps the math from blowing up.
Exactly. Now, adaptive layer normalization, or ADLN, takes that a step further. Instead of just flattening the numbers, it dynamically modulates the normalized features using scale and shift dials. And in standard video diffusion models, these dials are controlled purely by the time step of the diffusion process.
Because the model needs to know how much noise is in the latent space at that specific fraction of a second, right? Like if it's early in the process, there's a lot of noise. If it's late, there's very little.
Right. Standard models turn the scale and shift dials for both the video latents and the reference tokens indiscriminately, based entirely on the clock. And this is exactly how the domain attributes from the reference image, the shadows, the lighting, get permanently baked into the video latents.
Because they're being modulated by the exact same temporal dials?
Yes, they are locked together.
So how does domain-aware ADLN rewrite that circuit?
It creates two separate modulation circuits. The first circuit is for the video features. The scale and shift dials for the video remain conditioned solely on the time step. The video branch stays normal. But the second circuit, which handles the reference features, is completely different.
Okay.
The dials for the reference features are controlled by the time step, sure, but also by a new variable, a specific domain attribute.
A domain attribute, meaning the researchers are explicitly feeding a variable into the math that says, hey, this reference image belongs to domain A, but the target output is domain B.
Yes. By introducing this domain attribute variable explicitly into the reference branch's ADLN circuit, they are structurally decoupling the noise modulation from the domain modulation. It separates the content from the style. Yeah. In an in-domain scenario, you can set the dial to say, the reference is photorealistic and the target is photorealistic. But in a cross-domain scenario, you simply turn the domain attribute dial. You tell the circuit, extract the structural content from this photorealistic image, but apply the watercolor domain attribute during the modulation phase.
You know, I think I have an analogy for this. I'm imagining domain mode and this domain-aware ADLN like a high-end music mixing board in a recording studio.
Okay, let's see how the mechanics map out.
Right. So in standard S2V models, it's like trying to record a lead singer and a heavy metal drum kit using a single microphone placed in the middle of the room. The audio waves are completely entangled before they even hit the soundboard. If the producer wants to add a haunting cathedral-style echo to just the singer's voice to change the mood, they can't do it. Turning up the echo dial applies the reverb to the crashing cymbals and the kick drum too, turning the whole track into a muddy mess.
Because they share a single processing path and a single modulation circuit.
Exactly right. So Domain Monty is the equivalent of building an isolated vocal booth for the singer, giving them their own microphone, and running them into a dedicated separate track on the mixing board. The drums are the video latents, the singer is the reference image, the decoupling is physical.
I see where you're going with this.
And the domain-aware ADLN is like an effects pedal wired only into the singer's vocal track. The producer can turn the domain dial to add that cathedral echo to the voice, making the singer match a completely new acoustic environment without adding a single drop of echo to the heavy metal drums.
That maps perfectly to the tensor math, actually. You are applying the domain transformation strictly to the reference signal at the ADLN level before that signal is allowed to mathematically interact with the broader video generation process in the attention layers.
Okay, so we've solved the entanglement problem. We have a machine that can look at a photo, isolate the subject onto its own track, and strip away or modify its domain styling.
We do.
But that creates a massive new blind spot.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you decouple the reference image so aggressively and isolate it on its own track, how does the model know where to put the subject in the 3D space of the video? I mean, if I have an isolated reference photo of a coffee mug and I prompt a video of a person holding that mug, how does the AI know the mug needs to be physically placed inside the person's hand rather than just floating in the top left corner of the frame?
And that leads us directly into section 3 of the architecture, the spatial puzzle, and their solution to it, which is video reference dual rope.
Video reference dual rope. Let's start with rope. Rotary positional encoding. We mentioned it briefly during the self-attention discussion. Why do transformers need positional encoding at all?
Well, to understand ROPE, you have to understand a fundamental limitation of transformer architecture. Unlike older models that process data sequentially, transformers have no inherent concept of order, time, or space.
None at all.
None. If you feed a transformer a sequence of 1 million visual tokens, it processes them all simultaneously as a giant, unstructured bag of data. It mathematically does not know if a token represents a pixel at the top left of frame 1 or the bottom right of frame 50.
So it's completely blind to geometry.
Entirely blind. So we have to inject positional encoding. We have to attach a mathematical coordinate tag to every single token so the model knows where it belongs. Early models used absolute positional encoding, essentially adding sine and cosine waves to the data. But modern models use ROPE, which uses rotations in a complex plane to represent position.
Okay.
It assigns a 3D coordinate index to every token in the video latent space. You have an index for the frame number, the time dimension, you have an index for the height, and an index for the width.
So every token gets an XY time coordinate tag.
Yes. And the brilliance of ROPE is that it encodes relative position, not just absolute position. When the attention mechanism looks at the ROPE indices, it knows mathematically that tokens with rotational angles that are closer together have a shorter latent distance.
Right.
It inherently tells the model what is next to what, both in physical space on the screen and across time from frame to frame.
Okay, mapping out a 3D grid for the target video makes perfect sense. But how does this apply to reference images? If I hand the model a static photo of a dog to use as a reference for a 50-frame video, where does that static photo live in the coordinate system? It doesn't have 50 frames.
And this is exactly where prior S2V work fails conceptually. Existing models take the path of least resistance. They simply inherit the ROPE mechanism of the base video model. So if they are generating a 50-frame video, they treat the reference images as if they were just additional video frames tacked onto the beginning of the timeline.
Meaning they assign the reference image to be frame 0 or frame -1 right before the video starts.
Exactly. And the DomainShuttle researchers point out why this is mathematically and logically disastrous, especially for multi-subject generation.
Why is it so bad?
Imagine you are providing two reference images, a photo of a man and a photo of a cartoon bus. If you treat them as sequential frames on a single timeline like the man is frame -2, the bus is frame -1, and the video starts at frame 1, you are forcing the attention mechanism to learn a temporal continuity that absolutely does not exist.
Oh, right. You're telling the AI, first there was a man, and a millisecond later the man vanished, and a bus appeared in his place.
Right. You are forcing a false causal relationship between completely disparate reference photos. Furthermore, think about what happens if you provide 3 photos of the same man from different angles to give the model better structural data.
Yeah, no.
By placing them in sequential frames, you confuse the model's understanding of identity versus time. The model might think it's supposed to generate 3 different men walking in a line.
Because it reads them as a timeline. So how does DomainShuttle fix this coordinate nightmare? How do you map reference images without putting them on the video timeline?
They engineered video reference dual rope. They realized they needed to stop treating reference images as a prequel to the video. Instead, they create an entirely separate coordinate universe, a parallel rope E-space, exclusively for the reference images.
Parallel dimensions of coordinates. That sounds like a sci-fi movie. How does the math actually separate them?
In the video rope E-space, the temporal index, the frame number, starts at 1 and moves forward. But for the reference images in the dual rope space, the temporal index is hard-coded to 0. Always 0.
So the reference images are completely severed from the flow of time. They exist outside the timeline of the actual video.
Completely severed. But they still need to be organized spatially within that frozen time 0 dimension. Otherwise, the attention mechanism won't be able to differentiate between the photo of the man and the photo of the bus.
Right, they'd just be piled on top of each other.
Exactly. So the researchers use specific spatial offsets, mathematically denoted as delta, which represent shifts in the height and width grids.
Walk me through how the offset works practically. Say I have 2 different subjects, a reference photo of a dog and a reference photo of a cat. How are they arranged in this separate time 0 space?
For different subjects, they are spaced out aggressively across both the height and width grids. The dog is placed at one specific block of height and width coordinates. The cat is placed at a completely different block, offset by a full height and width dimension.
So they're sitting far apart from each other on a giant, invisible, flat 2D plane.
Yes. They are isolated spatially, so their features don't bleed into each other during the attention calculation. But here's the most fascinating architectural nuance. What if you provide 3 photos of the same subject? A front profile, a side profile, and a back profile of a specific car, for example. You want the model to know these aren't 3 different cars, they are just more geometric data about one single identity.
How do you map that without confusing the model?
Dual rope treats multiple images of the same subject as sub-images of one giant composite reference image. The offset for images of the same subject is strictly along the width dimension. There is zero offset on the height dimension.
So they are placed tightly side by side on the horizontal axis, but they share the exact same vertical axis.
Exactly. This mathematical design explicitly dictates semantic relationships. When the self-attention mechanism calculates the relative distances, it sees that the three car photos are tightly clustered together horizontally and share the same vertical space.
And that pulls them together in the model's brain.
Yes, it pulls their latent representations closer together, establishing a strong, unified identity association. But it sees the dog and the cat separated by vast distances in both height and width, explicitly telling the model they are distinct, unrelated entities.
Wait, if the reference images are at time 0 on a parallel grid, and the video tokens are moving from time 1 to 50 on a different grid, how do they ever connect? Doesn't this parallel dimension confuse the self-attention mechanism? I mean, how does the dog at time 0 end up running across the grass at time 10 if they don't share a coordinate system?
That touches on the brilliance of relative positional encoding. The self-attention mechanism doesn't require literal overlapping coordinates to function. It calculates relative distances and learns semantic association.
Okay, I think I follow.
By putting the reference images in a highly structured, separate rope E space, you actively prevent the model from trying to rely on literal pixel overlap, which, by the way, is what causes those terrible copy-paste artifacts. Instead, you force the attention mechanism to learn a semantic mapping. It learns, the entity clustered at this specific coordinate block in the reference space corresponds to the semantic concept of dog that the text prompt is asking me to place at coordinate XY in frame 10.
You know, I think I have a way to visualize this. Tell me if this analogy holds up. It feels like the organization of a theatrical production. The target video frames 1 through 50 is the actual stage where the play happens. It has depth, width, and time moving forward as the actors perform the scene.
Okay, so the live stage is the video rope E space.
Right. And the dual rope reference space is the casting director's corkboard hanging backstage in the dressing room. It has no time. It's just a flat board.
I like this.
If the casting director pins 3 headshots of the same actor right next to each other in a horizontal row, that's our width offset. You ever notice it's the same person giving different angles? But if they pin a photo of the lead actor on the top left of the board and a photo of a prop sword on the bottom right, that's our height and width offset. The director knows they're distinct entities.
Yes, exactly.
The corkboard doesn't tell you when the actor walks on stage or where they stand during the monologue. It just establishes who they are and what they look like. And the director, which is the attention mechanism, looks at the backstage board to know who to pull onto the live stage when the script, the text prompt, calls for them.
That is an excellent visualization. The corkboard explicitly defines the semantic relationships and boundaries between the references without forcing them onto the live stage prematurely. It provides the spatial logic required for complex multi-subject interactions.
All right, let's take a breath and synthesize where we are, because the architecture is incredibly dense.
It's a lot of math.
It is. So through Domain Modi, we decoupled the processing paths so the visual style of the reference photo wouldn't bleed into the video. Through dual rope, we isolated the spatial coordinates onto a backstage corkboard so the model understands exactly who is who without getting confused by false timelines. It feels like we have engineered a perfect machine.
We have engineered a structurally perfect framework, yes, but an architecture is only as good as what it learns. And neural networks, fundamentally, are lazy.
Lazy.
Oh, incredibly lazy. If there is a mathematical shortcut to minimize their error during training, they will take it. And that brings us to Section 4, forcing intrinsic understanding and the mechanism known as cross-pair-consistent loss.
What is the shortcut the network is trying to take?
It goes back to the copy-paste problem. Even with decoupled features and a beautiful backstage corkboard, if you train a model by handing it a reference photo of a person standing under a harsh neon red light, and you ask it to generate a video of that person, the model doesn't inherently know what a person is.
Right, it's just numbers.
It is just a matrix of numbers analyzing pixel values. The easiest, laziest way for the model to minimize its error function during training is to just memorize the red neon light and mathematically assume that the red light is an intrinsic biological part of the subject's identity.
Wait, really? So when you ask for a daytime video of that person walking in a park, it generates them glowing red in the sunlight because it thinks the red light is literally a facial feature.
Exactly. The model hasn't learned the intrinsic structure of the subject. It has just memorized the specific irrelevant domain features of the training image. The researchers needed a mathematical way to force the model to ignore the lighting, the background, and the pose, and only learn the underlying geometric identity.
And how do you force a math equation to understand the abstract concept of a soul or an intrinsic identity?
You use cross-pair consistent loss, or CCL. This is where the training methodology becomes remarkably elegant. During the training phase, the researchers don't just use one reference image for a target video. They take a single target video, say a specific woman drinking from a specific cup, but they supply two completely different sets of reference images for those subjects.
Two distinct sets. So set A might be a photo of the woman wearing a winter coat taken from the front and a photo of the cup on a table. Set B might be a photo of the same woman in a summer dress taken from the side and a photo of the cup being held in someone's hand.
Precisely. We have two sets of reference features. Now, the researchers run the data through two branches of the neural network simultaneously. One branch is trainable. The back propagation algorithm is actively updating its weights. The other branch is completely frozen. Its weights are locked, acting as a stable baseline teacher.
So we feed set A into the trainable branch and set B into the frozen branch.
Yes. And here's the core mechanism of the loss function. The system calculates the L2 distance, the absolute mathematical difference in the high-dimensional latent space between the final generated outputs of those two branches. The loss function heavily penalizes the trainable model if its output is different from the frozen model's output.
Let me make sure I am fully grasping this because it sounds like a paradox.
Mm-hmm.
You are feeding the network two drastically different visual inputs, different clothes, different lighting, different camera angles, and you are mathematically punishing the network unless it produces the exact same final video output.
Exactly. By forcing the model to minimize the latent distance between the outputs of two distinct reference sets of the same subject, you destroy the shortcut.
Oh, wow.
The model cannot rely on memorizing the winter coat because the winter coat isn't in set B. It cannot rely on the neon lighting because the neon lighting isn't in set B. The only mathematically possible way for the trainable model to win the game and minimize the loss is to identify the underlying structural similarities between the two sets.
It has to find the common denominator.
And that common denominator is the intrinsic identity, the core bone structure, the fundamental geometry of the cup. CCL forces the AI to achieve what we call latent invariance, extracting the pure identity completely unaffected by the irrelevant domain features.
That is incredibly clever. It reminds me of how human beings recognize each other. If I see my brother walking down the street in the dead of winter wearing a massive parka, a thick scarf, and a beanie, I instantly know it's him. If I see him 6 months later on a beach in a swimsuit and sunglasses, I still know it's him.
Because you aren't memorizing his wardrobe. Your brain has built an intrinsic geometric model of his identity.
Right. CCL is basically forcing the AI to play a high-stakes game of Guess Who, with two drastically different photos of the same person. The AI is looking at the parka in one hand and the swimsuit in the other, and it realizes the only way to avoid the mathematical penalty is to ignore the outfits entirely and just analyze the bone structure. It is forcing abstract reasoning into the latent space.
It is abstract reasoning driven entirely by geometric constraints. When you combine domain mode isolating the processing paths, dual rope organizing the spatial logic, and CCL forcing the abstract identity extraction, you have the complete cohesive engine of DomainShuttle.
Okay, so we've built this incredibly complex engine. But an engine doesn't run without fuel, and you can't prove it works until you put it on a test track. Let's move to Section 5, training data and the ablation studies. How much data did it take to actually teach this architecture how to see?
The sheer scale of the data pipeline highlights how computationally massive this field has become. They structured a rigorous two-stage training process. First, they curated a 200,000 image dataset containing multiple subjects. They pulled from diverse open-source datasets like UNO, Ecoforo, and Emusar.
Okay.
This first stage is strictly to endow the base model with basic personalization capabilities, just teaching it what a discrete subject is.
So 200,000 images is just the warm-up lap.
Exactly. The heavy lifting happens in the video personalization stage. For this, they process 750,000 videos.
750,000 videos. That is a massive amount of temporal data.
Pulled from datasets like Phantom Data, OpenS2V, and Ditto1M. And they couldn't just dump raw video files into the architecture. They had to rigorously filter it for aesthetics, motion quality, and resolution. If a video had bad camera shake or severe artifacting, it would degrade the model's generation quality.
Right, garbage in, garbage out.
But more importantly, for multi-subject training, the model needs to know exactly where the subjects are physically located in every single frame of those 750,000 videos.
How is that even possible to annotate? You can't have human workers drawing boxes around a dog for 50 frames across 750,000 videos. Yeah. Temporal tracking is notoriously difficult because subjects turn, they get occluded by other objects, the lighting changes.
You have to use an automated AI pipeline to train the AI. They utilized grounding Dino, which is a zero-shot object detection model. It can find subjects in an image based purely on text prompts. So grounding Dino draws the initial bounding boxes. Then they fed those coordinates into SAM2, the segment anything model 2.
Oh, SAM2 is incredible at tracing edges.
It is, and specifically, SAM2 performs multi-frame segmentation. It creates pixel-perfect masks of the subjects and tracks those masks as the subjects move and change shape through time across the video frames. This provides the incredibly precise spatial supervision that dual rope requires to learn those accurate coordinate mappings.
So it's models training models.
Yeah.
Okay, so they fed it the data. But in AI research, you have to prove that your fancy new mechanisms actually do the work. You have to prove it isn't just theoretical fluff. That's the purpose of an ablation study, right?
Yes. An ablation study is a systematic teardown. Researchers surgically remove individual components of their own architecture to see exactly how and where the machine breaks. It isolates the impact of each mechanism. They tested these ablations on the WAN 2.214b foundation model. The visual results are documented in Table 2 and Figure 5 of the paper.
Let's start the teardown. What happens if we rip out domain T? What if we go back to the standard DIT block where video and reference features are mixed together early in the self-attention process?
The cross-domain capability instantly collapses. In Figure 5, the prompt asks the model to generate a paper-cut man and a paper-cut woman walking through a paper-cut garden. It's a very specific, stylized 2D fantasy domain.
Okay, and what happened?
When they ablate domain mode, the model successfully generates the paper-cut garden, but the man and the woman. They are rendered as photorealistic, flesh and blood humans just standing in front of a paper-cut background.
The entanglement problem strikes back because they removed the isolated vocal booth, the independent processing path, the high-frequency photorealistic signal of the reference photos, just overpowered the text prompt in the attention block. The model couldn't strip the realism off the subjects.
Precisely. Domain mode is demonstrably the key to allowing the domain attribute to shift while preserving identity. Next, let's look at the spatial logic. What happens when they rip out video reference dual rope?
We take down the backstage corkboard, and we force the reference images to be frame 0 on the live video timeline again. What breaks?
Complex spatial interactions completely fail. Look at the paper cup example in the paper. The prompt is a woman holding a hot drink paper cup, and the cup has a specific 2D animated character printed on its surface as a logo. The researchers provide a reference photo of the woman and a separate reference photo of the 2D cartoon character.
A human-object interaction across two different visual domains. That requires an immense amount of special understanding.
It does. And without dual rope providing the semantic mapping, the attention mechanism falls apart. The model generates the woman. It generates the paper cup in her hand. It generates the cartoon character. But the character is just floating randomly in the empty air next to her head. It completely fails to attach the character to the physical, curved surface of the cup.
Why does it float? What is the actual mechanical failure there?
Because without the spatial offsets and the parallel rope e-tricks, the self-attention mechanism doesn't understand the semantic boundary between the subjects. It assigns a near-zero latent distance between the character and the background, causing the network to arbitrarily drop the tokens into the nearest available high-frequency patch in the latent space, which happens to be the empty air.
That paper cup example is the ultimate proof of why spatial mapping matters. It isn't just about rendering what an object looks like. It's about calculating its physical, causal relationship to the real-world human holding it.
Exactly.
Finally, what happens if we remove the cross-pair consistent loss, the CCL?
Right. If we stop playing the Guess Who game with the two different reference sets and the frozen network branch,
What happens?
the model reverts back to its lazy shortcuts. The ablation shows that without CCL, the model directly copies the exact pose, the exact background, and the exact lighting of the reference image into the generated video. It completely destroys the editability of the subject. The lost landscape finds an easy local minimum by prioritizing pixel matching over abstract identity matching.
So the teardown proves that every single piece of this architecture is structurally vital. The MAT decouples the features, the rope E organizes the spatial geometry, and the CCL forces the abstract identity extraction. It is a beautifully cohesive system. Which brings us to the grand finale, Section 6, the results. How does DomainShuttle actually stack up against the titans of the industry?
The quantitative metrics are quite stark. In Table 1, they benchmark DomainShuttle against the absolute state-of-the-art open source and closed source models. We are talking about Kling 1.6, VCE, Phantom, Skyreel's V3. These are the models dominating the space right now.
And what did the data show?
DomainShuttle achieved the highest performance in motion smoothness and text controllability. But the most staggering metric is the cross-domain score, or CD score. This is a metric that utilizes a powerful multimodal large language model, in this case GPT-4o, to thoroughly evaluate intrinsic subject consistency and style adaptation across complex domains. DomainShuttle achieved an 18.7% improvement in the CD score over the best existing state-of-the-art method.
Wait, really? An 18.7% jump in a major AI benchmark is not a marginal improvement. In this industry, fighting for a 2% gain takes months. 18.7% is a generational leap. That is the difference between a model being a fun toy and a model being ready for production pipelines.
It is a profound margin of victory. But while the metrics validate the architecture, the qualitative masterpieces, the actual visual examples shown in figures 3 and 4 are what truly demonstrate the breakthrough.
Let's describe some of these for you listening, because looking at the high-resolution PDF, the results are stunning. Let's talk about the real-to-fantastic mapping.
This is the process of taking real-world, photorealistic reference images of people and rendering them into highly stylized, abstract domains. In Figure 4, they use a photo of a real-world man and woman. The text prompt asks for them to be generated as 3D stylized characters walking in a sunlit animated park.
Like a high-budget Pixar or DreamWorks movie.
Yes, and DomainShuttle flawlessly renders them with that polished 3D animated rendering. The lighting is completely transformed to match the global illumination of a 3D engine. The skin textures are smooth and stylized, but crucially, their facial identities, the deep structure of their jawlines, the geometry of their eyes, their intrinsic look, are preserved so perfectly that you instantly recognize them.
Wow.
When you look at the baseline comparisons, Kling 1.6 completely ignores the 3D instruction and just generates photorealistic humans walking in a park. VCE tries to make them 3D, but it loses their identities entirely. They just become generic, unrecognizable cartoon characters.
It's the method-actor analogy in full effect. It strips the realism but keeps the skeleton. But the architecture works in reverse, too. The fantastic to real examples are mind-bending.
Figure 3 has a brilliant demonstration of this. The provided references are a real-world man and a flat, 2D, SpongeBob-like cartoon character. The text prompt is, "A man pauses on the street as a real-world yellow bus painted with the yellow animated character drives by."
So the architecture has to generate a photorealistic street, a photorealistic man, a photorealistic metal bus, but it has to take a flat 2D cartoon reference and seamlessly map it onto the side of the movie metal bus as a graphic decal.
And it executes it flawlessly. The yellow character is mapped onto the side of the bus. It reflects the real-world ambient lighting of the street scene. It follows the physical perspective of the moving vehicle, but it retains its exact 2D cartoon geometry without trying to become a 3D physical object.
That's incredible.
Meanwhile, baselines like Bindweave just hallucinate the cartoon character floating in the sky above the bus. Phantom generates the man perfectly, but completely forgets to generate the bus or the character.
It's the ultimate test of decoupling. The AI understands that the cartoon character is a semantic subject that needs to be painted onto a physical object within a photorealistic domain without cross-contaminating the styles. And clearly, human observers agree with these results because the human preference evaluation was a total blowout.
Oh, absolutely. They conducted a rigorous 40-person blind study, having humans rank the generated videos on a scale from 1 to 5. In the critical category of open domain subject consistency, DomainShuttle scored a 4.75 out of 5.
Near absolute perfection.
The closest competitor was Kling 1.6, which scored a 2.9.
4.75 versus 2.9. That is a crushing victory in subjective human perception. It proves that the mathematical decoupling translates directly into visual fidelity.
It validates the entire architectural philosophy of the paper. When you decouple the processing paths, separate the spatial maps into parallel dimensions, and force intrinsic geometric learning, the human eye inherently recognizes the output as vastly superior and infinitely more flexible.
Let's synthesize this journey. What we have explored today with DomainShuttle isn't just a clever software patch to make better social media filters. It represents a fundamental, mathematical uncoupling of identity from reality. By isolating features through the domain mixture of transformers, organizing spatial logic with video reference dual rope, and forcing true abstract identity recognition using crosspair consistent loss, this model achieves true open domain freedom. It proves that an AI doesn't have to memorize the pixels of your photo to know who you are. It can learn your structural essence.
It mathematically separates the signal of you from the noise of the physical universe you happen to be standing in. And if we connect this architecture to the broader trajectory of technology, it raises an incredibly profound question about the future of digital identity.
I always look forward to the bigger picture. What's the provocative thought you want to leave us with today?
Think about the implications of the highly compressed latent space we've been discussing. If models like DomainShuttle can now use math to isolate our intrinsic subject features, our pure geometric identity stripped of lighting, stripped of clothing, and entirely stripped of our physical dimension, what does this mean for the future of digital avatars and virtual worlds?
Oh, man.
Are we approaching a technological threshold where you will simply carry a small, encrypted mathematical file, a pure latent vector of your intrinsic identity? A file that acts as a universal key, instantly pluggable into any video game, any AI-generated film, or any virtual environment. You wouldn't need to spend hours creating a new avatar for every platform. You would just hand the rendering engine your intrinsic identity file, and it would generate you perfectly, instantly adapting you to the specific art style of that world. Whether it's a hyper-realistic simulation, a fluid watercolor painting, or an 8-bit retro game, all while you remain unmistakably, intrinsically you.
A universal passport for the digital multiverse, written in the language of decoupled latent vectors. That is a fascinating and honestly a very plausible future, given what we've seen today. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into DomainShuttle. Keep exploring the research, keep questioning the math behind the magic, and pay close attention to the rapidly evolving architecture of AI generation. We will see you on the next deep dive.